Okay, well, I'll go ahead and begin and we can let people join, trickle in as we go. So, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Peace be upon you all, and welcome to American Islamic College's Academic Lecture Forum. We'll begin with a land acknowledgement. God tells us in his holy book, to God belongs what is in the heavens and what is on the earth and what is between them and what is under the soil. Steeped in Islamic values of creational stewardship and justice, all of us at American Islamic College believe that God has entrusted the lands and waters he created to humankind, who were created to serve God and the creation as stewards or caretakers. We also believe that we must stand for justice even when we ourselves may be implicated. So we want to begin today by acknowledging that our campus sits on land that was originally entrusted to the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, peoples whose sovereignty, culture, and very lives were violated by colonial policy. We acknowledge and honor them, their descendants, and their land and waterways. Through rigorous scholarship and a commitment to social justice, the collective good, civic involvement, interfaith understanding, and intercultural engagement, AIC prepares students to become critical thinkers, visionary leaders, and responsible global citizens. In addition to our courses, programs like these provide educational opportunities for the exchange of knowledge and learning, and not just for the Muslim community, but also for the wider public. AIC offers accredited undergraduate and graduate degrees in Islamic Studies and Muslim chaplaincy. You can learn more about our programs at www.aicusa.edu. Tonight, we have a distinguished guest, Dr. Michael Brose. Dr. Brose is a professor of practice in Central Eurasian Studies at Indiana University, Bloomington. His research bridges Chinese history, Central Eurasian studies, and Islamic studies with a focus on the Hui Muslim communities of Yunnan province. His work examines mosque architecture, the halal food industry, and the political economy of Muslim life in contemporary China. Dr. Brosi is also active in digital history using GIS and network analysis to study data from Chinese historical sources such as gazetteers and tomb inscriptions. His publications include China and Transregional Halal Circuits, Globalization in the Chinese Muslim Community in Southwest Asia, and he's also written on Mongol and Ming history and the Uyghur elites of medieval China, combining quantitative and historical methods to study social networks across Eurasia. It is a real honor and privilege to host you, Dr. Michael Brosi. Thank you so much for being with us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Ramona. It's my honor to be with you all. I'm really thrilled to be talking about this subject that I know a little bit about. Islam in China is obviously a huge topic. Ramona really did a good job of kind of, sort of showcasing my research interests. I am trained primarily as a historian, and most of my work, my original work as a historian, actually focused on the 13th century Uyghurs. At that point in time, the Uyghurs were not primarily Muslim, they were Buddhist or Manichaeans. Um, I got interested in Islam in China, actually, as I was doing the final touches on my dissertation, looking at Uyghurs in Mongol China, when I became aware of a group of Uyghurs who had migrated to this new province called Yunnan. The Mongols created Yunnan as a province. They migrated there towards the end of the Mongol period, so in the 1350s. And once there, they became identified as Muslim. And this really intrigued me because most of the Uyghurs that I have dealt with in the Mongol Yuan dynasty were not Muslim. Like I said, they were Buddhist or maybe Manichaeans. They actually practiced a variety of faith traditions. And they're quite an interesting group in their own right. So that kind of got me started on the whole business of, well, wait a minute, why are these guys now identified as Muslims down here in this far southwestern corner of China? What's going on there? So then I made my first trip to Yunnan in 2001, and that began my long-standing interest, um, both in the history of Islam, because Islam and Central Asian Muslims were intimately involved in the creation of Yunnan as a province. I'll maybe I can touch on that a little bit. Um, but you also see lots of Islamic practice across Yunnan today. And as I spent more and more time in Yunnan, I started to notice more and more halal restaurants, certifications verifying halal standards have been met in restaurants and food stores and stuff like this. And then that led me to my more recent research on halal certification issues, the whole halal economy in China. And I'll touch on that towards the end of my talk. So tonight, what I wanted to do, Romana asked me to give a really broad overview of Islam in China. And I'm like, okay, I'm not sure I can do that in 40 minutes. So what I'm going to do is just touch on a few points that I think are most important um, with respect to Muslims in China. And this first slide, I'll kind of work my way through. I have a few major points that I want to begin by considering. But the first question is, so my title of my talk originally was this interplay and perils of ethnic and religious identity. But my real question has been, for a long time has been, why isn't China usually on a map when you turn to an encyclopedia of the Islamic world? Traditionally, China is not on that. And yet, a conservative estimate puts the most recent census from the state, which is I think 2020 or 2022, puts the total number of Muslims at 40 million. Most scholars actually think that it's closer to probably uh, 60 million. I guess I should read my own slide. I guess the most recent census puts it at 20 to 25 million. That's a really conservative count. I'm sure of it. So this is a huge number of people, right? Even though it is, not even 1% of the population. So they kind of get lost when people are thinking of the wider Islamic world. But I think that's a big error. And certainly China, as I'm going to talk about again towards the end of my talk, China is using all sorts of economic incentives to induce Chinese Muslims to participate with the state to try and provide a bridge between China and the wider Islamic world through the Belt and Road Initiative. And I'll talk about that a little bit as well. So let's just start and kind of work our way through this. There's a wide there's a widespread misunderstanding that Islam was established in China already in the 8th century of the Common Era. Yes, there were Muslims in China in the 8th century, the Tang Dynasty. We know this for sure. There are tombstones, there's textual evidence, other kinds of evidence. But um, in the Tang period, they were relatively isolated trade communities. They were not spread across China, and they were very much seen as uh, a community that had almost no interaction with the local Han population. Okay. In fact, it wasn't really until the 13th century of the Common Era that we have the first real in migration of Muslims into China, and that's thanks to the Mongol conquest. Um, the Mongols, being such a small minority, desperately needed the help of military personnel from Central Asia after they conquered the Khwarezmian Empire. Um, they recruited huge numbers of Central Asian military personnel to join their military. And as a result of that, lots of Muslims migrated into China once they eventually conquered all of China and stayed, unlike the Mongols, most of whom, after 1368, retreated back to the steppe north of China proper. So it's really if you think about the longer term history of religions in China, Islam is a latecomer. Um, it is, yeah. Let's see. And the next point I want to point out to you is that um, the Chinese Muslim community has also developed its own native traditions that are kind of wrapped within this title of Han Kitab, which is the intermingling of Chinese Confucian and Islamic values. These were uh, this 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 was done by Chinese Muslim thinkers and theologians starting as early as the 16th century, and they eventually expanded this across China. Now, it didn't penetrate all areas of China equally. And when we talk about Xinjiang, I'm going to talk about the Han Kitab tradition didn't touch that part of what we think of as China today. And it mainly is due to the fact that northwestern China or Xinjiang province wasn't incorporated into China as a province until really, really late, until the 17th century of the Common Era. So the Han Kitab tradition is really a phenomenon that is more consistent with what I would call mainland China. Today, Muslims are one of five, or Muslims were one of five nationalities starting in 1912. And then after 1949, the Chinese Communist Party built onto that original idea of the minorities and eventually established or identified 10 separate groups as minorities. I think there are three major challenges for Muslims across China today. And I've summarized these on the bottom of this first slide. Everybody knows about the securitization of the Uyghurs. And this really started after 9/11, and it was largely thanks to George W. Bush that the Chinese state almost overnight after 9/11 they flipped the discourse with respect to Uyghurs, and they changed it from talking about Uyghurs or describing them as separatists. After 9/11, they're all described as terrorists. And it's all part of this larger state securitization agenda that started after 9/11 and has only gotten more intense, especially after 2013 when Xi Jinping ascended to the height of power in the People's Republic. There's a more recent campaign to sinicize all foreign religions. This includes Buddhism, by the way. I'll talk about that a little bit more as well. And then finally, what I've started to realize is that the state has ingeniously or insidiously created a real wedge issue between different groups of Muslims, most particularly between Uyghurs and the Chinese Muslim community. And I'll describe these different communities in just a moment, so bear with me here for a second. The state has uh, made participating in the new Belt and Road economy, I think, a wedge issue that is really driving even further antagonism between these two major groups of Muslims in China. So, and that is to even question if there ever was actual unity across the groups of Muslims in historic China. But that's a separate issue. Maybe we could go into it in Q&A if anybody's really interested. Let's see. How do I go down here? Let's see. Okay, so here's a just a little bit of history. This is a map of mosques that the original few mosques, the white circles. I'll move my cursor. There's one over here at Taiyuan. Uh, Xi'an is another one of these pre-Mongol period mosques. There's another early mosque down here in Quanzhou, or I mean, sorry, Guangzhou, and also at Quanzhou. Um, but most of the, and this slide is actually really limited. One of my projects that I'm currently working on is to try and do a GIS mapping of mosques, at least in Yunnan province, and I'd like to expand that across the entire country of China, but that's probably a bigger project than I have time for in the years remaining to me. So I'll be probably be satisfied with Yunnan. Anyway, this is a slide showing the development of mosques as a result of the Mongol conquest. And you can see, as I said again, I know for sure from historic data that there are more mosques than are represented in this particular slide. But these were the big main mosques in the most important urban areas that sprang up as a result of the Mongol conquest. You don't see Xinjiang on this map, and that's because, again, Xinjiang at that point in time was not part of China at all. It was considered Eastern Central Asia. I'll come back to that momentarily. You do see one important mosque in the ancient town of Jianshui down here in Yunnan. Okay. So that's just to say that there is this history of the spread of Muslim communities across China as a result of the Mongol conquest of China, um, that is largely responsible for um, the Islamic communities that live in China today. Okay, we're going to jump ahead a number of centuries to the fall of the last dynasty, the Qing, in 1912. Actually, before 1912, um, the father of the nation of China, Sun Yat-sen, or Sun Zhongshan, as he's known in China, um, identified five major non-Han groups who all needed to be given a seat at the table when the new nation of China was constructed. And thus began this first discourse of the five races under one union that you see here. The Han, oh, sorry about that. The Han were identified with central China, the area in red, which went up through Gansu province. Um, the Mongols were the blue, all of the people that lived in the steppe. I don't know why my computer does this. The Manchus lived up here in the northeast, the Tibetans. And then what's curious for me is Muslims in 1912, they were called Hui, which is a term that has changed in meaning since 1912. But in 1912, the term Hui really was synonymous with Turkic Muslims, especially the Uyghurs, but also including other groups of Turkic Muslims, some Kazakhs, some Kyrgyz, some Salar, who are those guys are actually Mongols, but that's not important for our purpose. But what's interesting here is in 1912, you see the formation of this discourse of the five races under one union. Now, I'm going to come back to the one union thing because what's becoming more and more apparent in China today is that the discourse of the five races all being, in a sense, equal partners that Sun proposed um, after 1949, when the People's Republic of China was established, they the Chinese Communist Party extended Sun's um, program of recognizing ethnic minorities. But in a sense, they dislocated the ethnic minorities all as quote unquote the little peoples. That's a literal translation of the Chinese term for ethnic minority. Um, this is an interesting project. So the PRC was established in 1949. Almost right away, the Chinese Communist Party, they sent work groups out across the country to identify all of the different minority groups that lived anywhere across China. And the initial purpose, I think, was similar to Sun's. He needed to figure out, okay, whose interests do we need to represent to be able to keep them as members of the nation. Because the one thing we don't want to have happen, and I'll go back to Soon's slide here or Soon's proposal. One thing that Soon didn't want to have happen, and this was followed by Mao and the CCP after 1949, they didn't want any of the people that lived in any of these borderlands to secede from the territorial state. Because if they did that, look what China would be. It would be this territory that's in red. Okay. In fact, that was the exact same program that was followed by the CCP after 1949. Um, and almost right away, the CCP defined China as a unitary, multi-ethnic state. Okay. Now, what's really interesting is this business of the unitary state. So originally in 1949, actually, in writings that go back as early as the 1930s, Mao was already laying out the idea of the unitary multi-ethnic state, and he embedded in his pre-PRC writings this promise of autonomy to anybody that was identified as an official group within the state. Okay. So these work teams spread out. They came back to Beijing. They reported on something like they had found something like 450 or even more separate groups that self identified. Well, the Chinese leadership in Beijing got together and decided, oh, that's way too many groups. We can't deal with it. So they whittled all those groups down to 55 um, minority groups. And then the 56th group was the Han majority. One of the interesting ways that you see this being played out today, um, Han people in China refer to other ethnic minorities as Minzu, which is a term that could be translated as a nationality. They never refer to themselves, though, as the Han Minzu. All right. So there's this implicit hierarchical relationship where the Han are above all of the other 55 participants in the state project. Now, something happened along the way after 1955 when we see this poster created. All nationalities of our nation have united into a great family of independent and equal nationalities. All right, that's 1955. One of the things that happened after 1955 was the word independent was gradually lost. You see an anachronism or a reflection of that initial early promise of autonomy or independence uh, in the lexicon of administrative territories. So, for example, you have the Xinjiang, the official title of Xinjiang. It's a provincial area, right? It's actually called the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. It's not called a province. There are a couple of other provincial level autonomous regions. There are lots of autonomous regions at the county level. There are even autonomous cities and towns within specific counties. And this varies across the state depending on the demographics of the particular territory that you're looking at. So the promise of autonomy is still embedded in the territorial designations, but it has largely disappeared. And in fact, I believe pretty strongly that the current Chinese leadership is working really hard to actually get rid of the whole term of ethnic minority and have everybody join into the one big nation. Okay. Anyway, we can come back to this in the Q&A if you're interested at all. I hope I'm keeping on time. This is a map of China's ethnic groups, and this is actually a rather simplified map. I'm not going to go through this, but you'll notice the color coding. So, for example, the Mongols and various groups related to Mongols, like the Dao or the Dongxiang, et cetera. You see there where they are approximately located. Um, oops. Tibet down here. Here's Xinjiang. One of the interesting things you should note about Xinjiang is it's a fairly heterogeneous place, and it's become more, well, maybe not heterogeneous. It's become more Han dominated in the last couple of decades. But at the point when this slide was made, this was still a Uyghur or Kazakh or Kyrgyz dominant zone or part of China. And by the way, all of the Turkic peoples, well, yeah, let me wait on that. I'll get back to that. Here's a map of the distribution of Muslim groups across China. And you'll notice the dark red or the dark green here, and then sort of slightly smaller clusterings of different groups of Muslims. I'm going to say that roughly speaking, all of the Muslims, except for the Hui, live in this swath of territory here. Okay, basically the Northwest and a little bit in the north, Gansu province. Um, and we can come back to that. You'll notice another dark green area is Yunnan. So there are provinces where Muslims are clustered, but in fact um, we have Muslims living all over China. Okay, so what's the situation of Muslims in China today? Well, there are 10 separate groups. And as I've said here, you can think of them as being divided into four subgroups. The single largest group, and by the way, all of these groups that I list here, they are all official ethnic minority groups, including the most curious and odd of the groups, the Hui. And I say odd because so the Hui are technically indistinguishable from their Han neighbors. There are some Hui in Xinjiang, but more Hui are concentrated outside of northwest China. Okay. And I'll get back to that in a little bit. They are ubiquitous, as I said, across China. They are clustered in certain areas, and they are mainly Sunni. There are some exceptions to this, but for the most part, they're mainline Sunni Muslims. Excuse me. The second largest group of Muslims are the Uyghurs. And between the two, the Hui and the Uyghurs constitute about 90% of the total number of Muslim groups in China. The third group are minorities who share some ethnic identity with other Muslims in Central Asia. For example, Kazakhs, Uzbeks, Kyrgyz, and Tajiks. And then finally, we have a relatively new group of Muslims who are uh, they have their own identities. Some of them live in the Northwest, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, I'm sorry. I don't know what's going on with me here. Of course, it happens right when I'm giving a talk. Um, I'm going to now take you to two areas. I'm going to first focus on Xinjiang, and then I'm going to shift my focus to Yunnan, these two different parts of the Chinese is Muslim world. And I'll just say at the outset, I am not an expert on contemporary Xinjiang. Um, I know a lot about what is today called Xinjiang in the 13th and 14th centuries, but that was back when it wasn't called Xinjiang. Just FYI, the term Xinjiang is a term, it's a colonial term imposed on what most of us historians would call Eastern Central Asia by the Qing dynasty. The term literally means new borderlands or new territories. And you can see right away that the name itself, embeds this colonial history, right? Um, so Xinjiang is a really interesting area. Again, according to the 2020 census, approximately 45% Uyghur, 42% Han, 12% others. And I suspect actually now those percentages have changed. There's been significant in migration of Han over the course of time, and this continues to be the case. Um, and so I suspect that the Uyghurs are now a minority, and the Han have become a majority. All right. Um, Xinjiang was developed very early by the PRC, right, almost right after 1949, precisely because it was a zone that was contested earlier between China and Russia. And one of the reasons that this area of Eastern Central Asia was conquered by the Qing state and given this new name Xinjiang and incorporated into China was precisely to create a big buffer state between the expanding Russian Empire and the Qing Empire to the east. Okay. And China was never willing to let go of that. There were some muted attempts in the 1920s and 30s um, by local people in Xinjiang to create their own state, but that never really got off the ground. Boy, I don't know what's going on with my voice. So let me go to the next slide. Oh, wait a minute. Okay. The way that Xinjiang was developed by the People's Republic of China was through this quasi-military unit called the Xinjiang Production and Construction Corps. It was a quasi-military group because it was funded by the military, the equipment was given by the military, the members of the XPCC were technically military members, but they were ostensibly sent to Xinjiang to develop agricultural um, holdings and to develop land for production. Okay. Um, there were a number of headquarters spread across the territory. This map shows these district headquarters. And this is a map as of July 2022. So the XPCC was first given priority in Xinjiang in 1950, and it still is a major actor across the province today. Okay. Let's go back. Okay, so Xinjiang. Now we're talking about the Uyghurs. The Uyghurs are really um, known as inhabiting this area called the Tarim Basin. The Tarim Basin is an area that includes the second lowest place on Earth after the Dead Sea. It's this huge dry basin in the middle of which is a major desert called the Taklamakan Desert. Uyghurs began to inhabit this territory beginning in the ninth century of the Common Era. When they settled this part of Eastern Central Asia, they were largely Buddhists, and they populated or built important trade route cities on the northern, follow my cursor, the northern fringe of this big basin and the southern fringe of this big basin. Okay. And in fact, the historic Silk Roads ran right along either the northern or the southern fringes of the Tarim Basin because that's where these big, they were oasis city settlements. They were settled by Uyghurs, and um, and that's where the Uyghurs have been since the ninth century, more or less. The Uyghurs in this region were first converted to Islam in two different stages. In the 10th century, I don't know how much you've studied the history of inter-Asian Islamic states, so I don't know if anybody in the audience knows about the Karakhanids or any of these other early local Islamic dynasties. The Karakhanids, who existed just to the west, they existed over here in Central Asia, or Western Central Asia. Oops. They were responsible for spreading Islam across the Uyghur populations or city states that lived on the southern fringe of the Tarim Basin. The Uyghurs who lived on the northern fringe of the Tarim Basin, however, didn't convert to Islam until the 16th century. I don't have time tonight. I guess I could address that in Q&A if anybody's really interested.
Yeah,
But
Dr. Brosi, 10 minutes.
10 minutes left? Oh, okay. I talk way too much. Okay, I will speed through this. All right, so this is the history of the Uyghurs. I've given you um, the major um, schools that Uyghurs practice, the Gedimu uh, non-Sufi school. There's a newer school. It's also a Hanafi. It's called the Shidao Tong. And then we have to remember that Uyghurs and Central Asian Muslims were heavily influenced by Sufism. And in fact, today, one of the biggest features of Islamic practice in Central Asia is Sufi religious rituals. So I'm showing you here the tomb of a famous Sufi master, Afak Hoja. This is the interior of his tomb showing his tomb, interior of his mausoleum. This is an exterior. Okay, so one of the other interesting things about Islamic practice among the Uyghurs is the pre-Islamic traditions kind of commingling with Islamic traditions. And here's a great example of worship at a saint's tomb in a rural part of Xinjiang. These practices today, you won't find this happening because the state has completely outlawed these practices. But this photo was taken before. This was in the 1990s. Okay, let's turn to Yunnan. There are Yunnan and Xinjiang share a couple of things in common. They were both incorporated into China late. They're both borderland zones, and more recently, both of them are functioning as ports in the Belt and Road. Okay. Um, Yunnan was actually incorporated into China by the Mongols in the 1250s, and almost immediately Islam spread into this new province because the Mongols relied primarily on Central Asian Muslim troop units for the conquest and pacification of that whole province. Okay. You can see this reflected in the names of places in Yunnan. So, for example, this mosque comes from a town in southern or south central Yunnan called Najiaing. The term Najiaing literally translates as the Na family's military garrison. And that's a term that comes directly from the Mongol period. Places like this with these kinds of names you can find all over Yunnan. This is a different kind of mosque. This is a traditional Chinese Hui mosque that's found. This style is actually ubiquitous across China. This particular one is now the oldest mosque in Yunnan. It dates to the Ming period, so sometime in the 1400s, and it's in the old city of Dali. Um, one of the things that's important in Yunnan is there's a growing Dawa movement in Yunnan. This is a photo I took when I was in Shadian. It's a town in south central Yunnan in 2018. These guys were listening to a preacher who is sitting here. You can just barely see him. Um, and this is becoming more and more popular among locals, especially in rural parts of Yunnan province. Finally, the Belt and Road Initiative, you can see that Xinjiang up here and Yunnan are both now positioned as vital entry and exit ports to connect China to the wider world. And that certainly includes to the wider Islamic world. I'll give you a couple of examples of that. In 2018, I attended a halal conference in Xi'an, the capital of Shanxi province. And what I didn't know, the first day of this trade fair, it was advertised as a trade fair. What it really was all about, though, was the signing of agreements by 20 halal food producers, all Chinese, from Xi'an and close by, signing agreements with halal certification experts who had been recruited mainly from Malaysia or Indonesia. These are the guys standing behind them. And they were signing agreements that would, in effect, guarantee that all of these guys seated at the table, once they were trained, uh, and were able to give the Jakim or the MUIS halal certification seal on their products, they would be ready to go to ship their products out outside of China. And we can talk about certification issues. This has been one of the major impediments for China to try to get its halal products out of China. And this is a rather early attempt to try and mitigate that problem or address that problem. Um, I've done a lot of work in Yunnan. This is the woman who at the time ran the Halal Industry Association of Yunnan. It's another example of Belt and Road participation by Hui. Here's Yunnan coffee. I discovered recently that Yunnan coffee is being marketed, exported in huge commodities to Dubai, where it's being sold as halal coffee. I'm not quite sure how halal it is, but and that's one of the projects that I still have to track down in my research. Okay, very quickly, I spent way too much time on the preliminaries. What I should have gotten to is this business of sinicizing religion. This is now state policy. Um, and what it really means is the indigenization of religious faith, practice, and ritual in Chinese culture. Essentially, what the Chinese state is trying to do is to remove any so-called foreign elements from foreign religions, and they are specifically trying to align all religions in China so that they serve Communist Party ideology and state agendas. Okay. I know this is a lot of information here. We can come back to this if you want. Here's a 5-year planning outline. Um, and this was actually translated from this group that translates Chinese legal texts into English. You can read this quickly. Adherence to the direction of sinification is our nation's religions is the basic path for reconciling of Islam and socialist society, etc., etc. We can talk more about this. I have some real issues with this program, but that's what's going on in China right now. Um, oh boy, I've probably given you way too much. So there are one of the things that's important to understand about China, the Chinese state constitution does guarantee the right to practice one's religion, but it also guarantees the right to not practice any religion. And additional articles have been added to the Constitution later that limit the role of religion in Chinese society. And all of that is coming together since 2013 when Xi Jinping ascended to power. All of that is now being kind of grouped under this new program of the need to sinicize all religion. And I'm going to emphasize here again, all religions should promote national unity. Okay. All religions should be domestically oriented under state regulation, and they need to get rid of any foreign influence in religion, etc., etc., etc. Now, I'm going to end by showing you an example, a vivid example of how the state is enforcing this sinicization. This is the new mosque in this same town, Shadian. It's in south central Yunnan. I've visited this place a number of times. This mosque was constructed in about 2008. Shadian has a really interested uh, history. Shadian has been known for uh, ever since the Mongol period as a center of Chinese Muslim life and activity. In 1975, the People's Liberation Army attacked the Hui community of Shadian and killed over 1,000 people. And since then, and after Mao died, the state allowed Shadian to reopen. They gave them a lot of money and they built this brand new mosque. This was before 2023. Now, look what's happened to the Shadian Mosque. The Let me just go back to the earlier picture. See the minarets, the onion dome, I call this kind of a hybrid Chinese slash Middle East sort of hybrid architectural style. It's kind of a rather weird architectural style, but the Chinese the new mosques have all been built along this same model. Now, what's going on? The Chinese state has forced all Muslim communities to remove domes, minarets, and construct the mosques or reconstruct the mosques so that they resemble Chinese architectural forms. Um, and I'm going to end with this slide right here. So, religion has to be subordinated to the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. It has to incorporate CCP ideology. It has to eradicate foreign influences. And the state is asserting absolute control over the clergy and all institutions. And this is not just limited to Muslims. Okay. All right. That's a lot.
Thank you so much. No, that was amazing. That is a lot. This should be offered in several courses, I know. And so I appreciate you trying to cover as much as you did today. I would like to open up for questions.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Feel free to unmute yourself or drop it in the chat, and we'll try to get to as many as we can in the next few minutes.
And I'll try to be more brief in my answers to questions than I am. I didn't have a script, and you can tell what I kind of go off
It was
topic.
great. Thank you so much. Okay. So Dr. Timothy. President Dr. Timothy Giannotti, you have your hand raised. Go ahead, please.
Yes, please. Thank you, Ramona, and thank you so much for this, Michael. I have a question. If the indigenization of the Muslim communities in China is a priority, that means that there must be madrasas or universities where a very high level of Islamic studies training can take place, so that the Chinese can be producing its own Chinese ulama. And so,
Mhm.
where is that happening, and how is that unfolding?
So it still happens. Actually, so this kind of Chinese production of their own ulama, their own translations, that started as early as the 17th century. So that's not a new phenomenon. That's part of this Han Kitab tradition that I referenced much earlier in my talk. So that still happens. The big problem, though, is that now all madrasas have to work with the state. There's much greater control. And in fact, Xinjiang is really infamous for this, but it's now spreading to other Islamic centers. There's a lot more control by the state over who can even go into the mosque. One of my grad students was in central China about a year and a half ago doing some field work, and he said that they had cameras, facial recognition scans going on, and you had to actually present, even locals had to present their ID before they could even be allowed inside the mosque. Um, so ostensibly, Muslims, just like Christians, just like Buddhists, are still allowed to practice their faith. Um, but um, I don't know exactly what that looks like. And part of the reason I can't
Hmm.
answer this is because um, it's impossible for a foreigner at this point in time to do any sort of interview on the street or get into a mosque. Things have changed so much since pre-COVID. So I don't know that that answers the question.
No, no, thank you. It's a good start. These are all big subjects and big questions, and so
Yeah,
tonight is about beginning the conversation. Thank you.
yeah.
Dr.
Hmm.
Ijaz Hussein has a question.
Yes, I'm Numan Malik, calling from Dublin, Ohio.
Okay.
And we have published a lot of literature on Islam in Chinese,
Huh.
which includes the Holy Quran by Maulana Muhammad Ali, The Religion of Islam by Maulana Muhammad Ali, and two more books, which is Muhammad the Prophet, which are Muhammad the Prophet, and Early Caliphate. So they're all in simplified Chinese and
Huh.
actually have been translated from English into Chinese by a English Chinese professor. I mean, a Chinese English professor in one of the big cities there. I don't know which one, but she comes occasionally to Columbus, Ohio, and that's how I got in touch with her. So what I wanted to know was that how easy it is to get this literature, number one, into China if it's published outside, or is there any way that one can contact Chinese Muslims in China and give them, the typesets and all the material they need in order to publish it locally there in China?
I think that's going to be extremely difficult at this point. I can tell you for sure, my Hui friends are scared to death. The state closely monitors all religious establishments, not just mosques, churches, Buddhist temples. Um, they are on the lookout for people bringing literature in. You might be able to, if you had like one copy of something, you might be able to get that into China. But the other problem is, how would you reproduce it in China? If you had a friend who could do it underground, that might be possible. But let's, for example, let's say you took this one text and you just took it down to the local copy shop. Because China is now largely a cashless economy, all transactions are run through your bank. Okay. For a foreigner to go and do anything in China, you have to have, you have to link your local bank account up with the Bank of China in order to be able to do these transactions.
Mm. What
That
about the
means
internet? Is that a possibility? Is the
very,
internet
very
available?
difficult. The internet, I teach a whole course called Eurasian Firewalls, and it's about Chinese manipulation or control of the internet. It's very, very difficult to transmit things like this on via the internet because um, the Chinese state closely monitors the internet traffic for any kind of keyword that you might possibly think of, and they'll shut it down. It's so. I mean, I don't want to take up a lot of time here tonight to talk about this, but it's really unfortunate. Um, I, I don't know what the answer is. I'm sorry about that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. Dr. Ibrahim Ozdemir had his hand up, Vice
Yeah.
President.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Michael. It was really, really very, very, you know, uh, important talk and a lot of information you gave us. And it means, yeah, because of time limit, there's a lot you can tell to us. But
Yeah.
my question is, first, Muslims and Buddhists, they survived the President Mao's cultural revolution. But now the new government, Communist Party, have more tools. They are using all tools of information, social media, and technologies. And what is the chance of religious communities, Muslims and Buddhists, and also Christians, to survive these strict rules? Second, this, you just made very, very important observation, just how China swiftly just they changed their frame of after 9/11 to the terrorists. They just made them reframe the Muslims as a terrorist. But no, what is sad, the China, at the same time just invested a lot of, you know, projects in Muslim countries.
Hmm.
The new the Silk Belt, initiative and others, and then I see many Muslim countries, and they just keep quiet. They cannot criticize China what they are going to do. Even they are just share their, frame of terrorism, and what do you think about the Muslim, response to the Chinese, government's policy? About the Dr. Ejaz's question, I visited China twice. As Michael will agree with me, even you are just enter the China airspace, nothing is working. No YouTube, no
Right.
WhatsApp, nothing. And in
Right.
China, almost nothing is working. And whatever is working, you have to be very careful. When you are
Yeah.
talking, when you are emailing a Chinese Muslim, be very careful.
Yeah.
You can put them very easily to a dangerous situation and label them as a terrorist and who is supported by the outsiders. This is the
Right.
main one of the major argument of this government using. Anything from the outside, they say, oh, it is a conspiracy theory. They see he also has a international, as a part of international network. I think we have to be very careful about that. But I wonder my question, your answer to my questions. Thank you,
So,
Michael.
yeah, so I just want to be clear. The Chinese state is not labeling all Muslims as terrorists. They're reserving that label for Uyghurs. Okay. And I just want to remind everybody that Uyghurs are just one of 10 Muslim groups that are officially recognized in China. To my knowledge, the Hui are not being described as terrorists unless they are involved in particular, you know, issues, okay, political issues. I think I think most Chinese Muslims and most Christians, most Buddhists are figuring out a way to live. They can still practice their religion. There are more restraints on it. Um, it's not quite as bad as things were in the Cultural Revolution when, you know, people were just simply taken out and killed. But there is people have to be really careful. And I think for the Hui community, what I've seen and the reason I've gotten so interested in halal, and I didn't really have time to really touch on this, um, I've gotten interested in halal because it really appears to me that a lot of Hui are able to coexist with the state. They're actually able to become economic partners with the state because the state wants to be able to export halal products, especially to Muslim majority states. That includes, so there are direct ties to Dubai, the UAE. There's also direct ties to Malaysia and Singapore, Indonesia. Okay. Um, so the Hui in particular are well positioned to be able to work within that economic space. So they're, yeah, they're in a really interesting position. The Uyghurs are much less fortunate because they have been unfortunately kind of dually branded because of their ethnicity as well as their religion. Um, and so they're in a kind of a separate category from other Muslims, I would argue. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, it does.
Uh,
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take this will be the last one. Dr. Mohammed Abul Hussein. Uh,
Okay. Can you hearing? Are
yes.
you hearing? Thank you, Dr. Ross. I am Dr. Mohammed Abul Hussein from Bangladesh, but now I am in the Mecca for religious purpose in Saudi Arabia. Thank you so much for your excellent lecture presentation. I have just a question about when first reached the Islam in China, first time. Who was first Muslim reached in China and start first Dawah activities? Have you any specific information about that?
Can you repeat the question? Are you asking when Islam first appeared in China?
Yeah. And who
So
was the first Muslim reached in China and started Dawah activities?
started Dawah activities.
Yeah. First time. And who is censoring?
Okay, so there are a bunch of questions kind of embedded in there. Um, so the first Muslims that are recorded in China appear in the 8th century of the Common Era. They were traders um, from various parts of. I'm not exactly sure where they came from, but there are tombstones. There are some other textual evidences showing that activity. Um, in terms of the Dawa activity, I guess I'm a little unclear exactly what you're asking. Are you asking historically, or are you asking what is the genesis of the Dawa community at this point in time?
I'm asking historically.
History.
Yeah.
So again, yes, there were Muslims in China from the 8th century, but my argument has always been that you really can't date the integration of Islam into China, where it started to become a normal part of the Chinese religious landscape. You can't date that until the mid 1200s of the Common Era. and that's thanks to the Mongol conquests. You see, the Mongols, in order to conquer China, the Mongols were a very tiny group of people. And so, in order to conquer China, they used huge numbers of Muslim armies that they had recruited after they had conquered Khwarezm. Um, and then most of those Muslim military units actually were assigned to be permanently stationed at strategic points across China. This was a common way that the Mongols incorporated newly conquered areas into their empire. And that's one of the reasons, that's the main reason that Islam became finally, for the first time, really, part of the normal religious landscape of China. Okay, now it took several centuries for it to really become normatized. If I asked my Han friends, a lot of them would still say, oh, no, 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 Islam is still a foreign religion. But in fact, Islam has been in China since the 1200s. You know, that's a long time, right? And I think it's safe to argue, especially given this tradition of the native production of Islamic scholarship starting in the 16th century. You have this long and rich tradition, both of translation of Arabic and Persian texts into Chinese, but you also have Islamic Chinese Muslim scholars writing their own treatises, their own texts about Islam. Okay. And that all became part of what I would call the Chinese Muslim tradition. And that's really then become, integrated into the religious landscape of China. Does that make sense?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much for that rich discussion. We really loved having you with us today, and thank you to everyone who attended. The video will be shared, and so you will have access to this presentation in about a week or so. Thank you all so very much.
Let me say one thing. If any
Sure.
of you want to follow up with any questions, please feel free to email me. Did you give them my email?
I did not, but I can we can
Yeah,
put
if
it
you
in
don't
the chat
mind.
here. Yeah.
Let's see, maybe I can type it in the chat. Oh, I'm not very good at this. I'm kind of a Luddite when it comes to technology. So my email is just brosemc@iu.edu.
Michael, don't blame yourself. All senior professor is the same. Maybe some exceptions, like Dr. Timothy is very, mashallah, using technology very efficiently.
But if any of you want to follow this up, I mean, I know I presented a lot, and I'm sorry I didn't space it out more evenly across the talk. This is a huge topic. We could spend hours talking about any one of these things, right? Um, but
Well,
I'd
we'd
I'd
love
love
to
to
have
be
you
in,
back.
yeah, I'd love to be in touch with anybody if you know, uh, want to pursue any of this stuff. Well, I don't know, Romana, maybe you have a time limit here. I'm willing to hang around on Zoom for a little bit longer if anybody has more questions, but that's
So
that's up
if
to you.
I can ask a question, I'm Ijaz actually from Pakistan. I'm sorry I couldn't ask this question earlier because of the technicalities involved.
Okay.
So my question is that we saw recently there has been trade war between China and the US. And President Trump in particular, or the administration, they didn't raise any concerns regarding, for example, the situation in Xinjiang, with the ways, for example, the tightening of life for the Uyghurs. So I
Right.
was wondering whether, let's say, in the future, the American administration would be raising this issue of the treatment meted out to the Uyghurs.
Well, you know as much as I do about that. I wish I had better things to say. I'm going to try to avoid becoming political here. But I will say that I think, the Trump administration has completely ignored human rights issues. Um, I'll just leave it at that. I mean, I could probably get into trouble for really saying what I think, but I just think it's frankly yeah, China has huge human rights issues, right? Um, I don't know. I don't know
Yeah.
what to say
Yeah.
without
But
becoming political.
Yeah, we got it.
yeah,
We got it. We got it. Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Michael, to my experience, I just as I said, I visited China twice. Sometimes young people, they have very radical views. It is normal for them, but I think we as a Muslim scholar we have to let them to think deeply and to come some bit creative new methods. Just radicalization is just make them victims, more victims. So they
right.
have in the Islamic tradition, especially, they can learn a lot of things, as how Islam is rich there. But I think this sometimes there's radical. These young people they have a very limited information of Islam, and they are very reactionary, and the energy and their reactions used against them. So we have to be very, provide them new tools how they can, solve their problems in these difficult times, as they
Right.
as they survived from the President Mao's, cultural revolution, when there was no human rights, no internet, nobody cares. But now, at least, there's a lot of people. They have concerns about that. Try to understand them and to help their problems.
Yeah.
Thank you. It was an excellent presentation. I learned a lot. I am enriched this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your comments. Yeah.
Thank you again, everyone, for attending and your participation. And thank you, Dr. Michael Brose. We'd
Thank
love to
you.
have you back sometime. Thanks
Yeah.
for this
Yeah,
great presentation.
I'd love to follow it up. I mean, we could do a whole talk just on the whole sinicization um issue. Without getting into the history stuff at all. And I think that's actually really important. I think a lot of Americans don't understand uh this campaign. But it has huge negative implications, not just for religion. It has huge implications for the future of anybody who is not a Han. Okay. You opened, Romana, you opened up the talk tonight by acknowledging the indigenous peoples, right? This is the kind of talk that in China is going to disappear someday, I think. I'm afraid. Um, I don't want to see that happen. Um, but I also think that most people outside of China don't have a clue about the pressures that the ethnic minorities across China are facing today. And it's more insidious than it has been. In some ways, it's more insidious than it was during the Cultural Revolution, because it's, you know, kind of behind the scenes, and people are subjected across China, like I've said, to more and more social scrutiny or state scrutiny, right? Anyway, I'm going on, and I know you want to uh, quit this, so but this could be a topic for another discussion. Anyway, that
Absolutely. No, thank you. Thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank you
We
so
we will
much.
appreciate that.
Pardon me?
We will appreciate that. Yes. I hope in the future, inshallah.
No,
That'd be
absolutely.
great. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for your questions. They were great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Yeah,
Have a
thank
good
you.
rest of your evening.
Thank you
as
so
well.
much.
Thank
And
you.
hopefully I can visit you guys in person sometime.
أهلا وسهلا
Bye-bye.
يا أستاذ.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Good night.
You too.